Hello and a very warm welcome to today's IISS Japan Chair Programme webinar, Japan's Grand Strategy in the Reiwa Era. I'm Robert Ward, IISS Japan Chair and Director of Geoeconomics and Strategy. And together with my colleague, Yuka Koshino, IISS Research Fellow for Japanese Security and Defence Policy, we will be chairing today's event. This is in effect the inaugural session of the IISS's new Japan Chair Programme. So it's especially gratifying that we have such a large and truly global audience today. I like to think that with the size of today's audience, we're testing Zoom to its very limits. We have attendees from Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas, both sides of the US. So really an impressive range of countries and time zones. It's good to see so many familiar faces in the audience, of course, as well as to be able to welcome, I hope, some new friends. A large part of the draw for this event, of course, is our esteemed guest, Mr. Kanehara Nobukatsu. Kanehara-san, well known to so many of you, I'm sure, is expertly placed to give insights into how Japan is thinking about the world, how it sees its role in buttressing the increasingly frail multilateral order, and of course into the direction of its grand strategy in the just started Reiwa era. I think it's fair to say that Kanehara-san has been one of the leading strategic thinkers in Prime Minister Abe Shinzo's second administration, in his capacity both as Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary in 2012 to 2019, and as the first Deputy Secretary General of the National Security Secretariat in 2013 to 2019. Before joining Japan's cabinet, Kanehara-san enjoyed a long and distinguished career in Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, covering an impressively wide range of topics and geographies. And as if all that wasn't enough, Kanehara-san and I have just been talking about the fact that the French have awarded him the Order of the Légion d'Honneur. I think that was in 2015, so very impressive. And Kanehara-san is currently Professor of Doshisha University's Faculty of Law. Before we start, however, I'd like to outline the order of play today and some housekeeping rules. This webinar will last for around 1 hour. For the first 30 minutes or so, Yuka and I will be in conversation with Kanehara-san, after which we will open the virtual floor to questions. Can I have the Q&A slide, please? I know that many of you will have joined a webinar before, particularly recently in this sort of era of the pandemic. But just to be safe, I'll explain the Q&A procedure. To ask a written question, please use the Q&A button, or if you want to ask a question directly, please raise the blue hand. You can write your question at any time, of course, during the webinar. Where we can, we will group similar questions so that we can answer as many of your questions as possible. It's always good to have questions in store, so please don't hold back. These sessions always work best if there is strong audience participation. Please, of course, state your affiliation when you're asking your question. Kanehara-san has generously said that he's happy to answer questions on absolutely anything. So audience, the challenge is on. I will need, however, to be strict, very strict, bordering on the fierce with timekeeping. So if you want to ask a question to Kanehara-san directly, please limit yourself to one question, and questions please, not statements. Finally, this session is on the record and will be posted in due course on the IISS's website, which you can find at www.iiss.org. And with that, Kanehara-san, thank you very much for your time today, and a big, very warm IISS welcome to our webinar. Fantastic.
Thank you, Bob.
So first questions from me, if I may. We don't want to make this into a COVID-19 webinar. We're sort of COVIDed out, I think, many of us, but it is the elephant in the room. And I know that many of our audience will be very interested to hear your views on whether or the COVID pandemic crisis has changed the strategic environment for Japan, and whether it alters the parameters on which Japan formulates its grand strategy.
Well, thank you, Bob. I have to say that the Tokyo we have just lifted the state emergency declaration, but the victims are the death number. It's around 1,000. It's much smaller than in Europe and in the States. I don't know the reason, but people say it's because of the BCG, tuberculosis, the vaccine. We don't know, not yet. But anyway, the social distancing and Tokyo was empty. Just people are now coming back. But factories, restaurants, they must be opened, but it's not yet fully back because we are fearful of the second wave. And this will continue. And I have to say that the globalization markets and human traffic by planes all now became zero. And suddenly governments are taking back the power from the markets. The extremely extended the supply chains are shattered everywhere and companies are in trouble. But the still financial sector still okay, and stock markets are still okay. Not yet. The big wave came to the core of the economy, but the economy will not go up in V shape. It will be in L shape. But I have to say one thing here. Is COVID changing our fate eternally, or is this a setback tactical one? The Lehman shock or oil shocks changed our way of lives deeply. In particular, the oil shocks changed our efficiency in energy, and this COVID will change many things, social distance or telework. But I have to say the basic trend of 21st century will not change. We're headed for the right strategic direction. Let me explain this in 3 levels. One is economy. The globalization will not stop. Supply chain will be changed a bit. And the advanced nations will take back some small sector, but market has different logic. It goes to the places where labor price, the wages is lower, laborers are skillful, the markets seek the profits, and this will not change. Globalization will continue with some restrictions later, but this will continue. And second, the strategic balance. We were seeing China was rising, and this was because of their industrialization. The British Industrial Revolution came to our shore 100 years ago. Now it's washing Chinese shore. Now next, it will wash Indian shore, and finally African shore. They will rise, and this power shift is real. Can we engage them? We tried so far very, very seriously push them into WTO. After Tiananmen, our emperor went to see Chinese leaders, and they broke ice with that. We tried hard, but the things that we are seeing today is the opposite that we want to expect. In Senkaku Islands, South China Sea, India-China border, there are eminent expansionist tendency here, and they're changing with salami tactics, the status quo, picking up islands, making small advances in the Himalayan mountains. And we have to make China, again, engaged, but it's now, I have to say, very difficult. But I have to say one thing, China might reach the size of US, might, I don't know, but China will not reach Japan, US together, and China will never reach Japan, US, Europe together. And that means we can engage them. They'll peak out someday, and they have to change, but we cannot impose them anything. They have to change themselves. I have to say, in Asia, free zone in Asia was a fake during the Cold War time. There was no democracy here. But in 1990s, many nations turned to democracy. Liberal international order, multilateralism based upon ASEAN, and the rule-based international community is just being formed in Asia. And this trend will not go back. These nations are very proud of their own democracies, and they are still struggling to make it functioning fully. There are flaws, of course, but we have to engage them as not as students of democracy. They are real powers who are very proud of democracies. We have to establish a liberal international order in Asia. This is a very big stake that we cannot miss. So this is where we are, Japan. And one thing is the United States was the guarantor of the order in Asia. They fought Korean War. They fought Vietnam War in the context of the Cold War. I believe that Americans are anti-colonial power, but it was fought in the framework of thinking of framework of Cold War, and they put back. But we can no longer ask Americans to take the whole burden. Japan is standing up, Korea is standing up, many ASEAN nations are standing up. They still feel small, but they will become responsible, and we have to make efforts together with them. The ASEAN multilateralism is a good asset for everybody. We have to use that. But again, it's not enough to have talks. We have to have a strategic commitment of major powers here. Americans, of course, and Australians, Indians, and I have to count on the Europeans who do share this concept of liberal order.
Kanehara-san, you mentioned China and its destabilizing influence in the region. Particularly recently, you talked about the Senkaku Islands. We talked about Hong Kong before. And of course, the sort of general activity, grey zone activity in the South China Sea. What do you think, from Japan's perspective, is going on in China? And does the direction that Xi Jinping seems to have taken, does that complicate Japan's ability to engage with China, do you think?
We cannot engage unilaterally China. We have to make them understand that their efforts are also necessary. And they say they are supporting free trade, that's fine, but they do not stop the salami tactics type, they say cabbage tactics, they say they don't stop their PLA, make advances. Senkaku Islands in 2012, they started to touch American allies in Asia. This is the first time they do. Philippines Scarborough was taken virtually by China. They came to Senkaku Islands. They don't send gunships, they send coast guards. They use gray zone. Simply, they do not want to provoke American Navy, but they bully. It's enough to bully. It's enough to send Coast Guard vessels. They are theoretically part of the Navy, but it's enough to send Coast Guard vessels to bully the smaller nations in Asia. We could push them back. Our Coast Guards are chasing them and pushing them back, but they come regularly. They came to our shore, I mean the territorial water, regularly 3 times per month. It's a permanent violation of Japanese sovereignty on trial of changing the status quo by force. It doesn't matter whether it is Coast Guard or Navy. They are changing the status quo slowly, and this is sort of Byzantium type, very slow invasion by using everything, but they have to stop it. They don't have to do that. This is not 19th century any longer. Japan was angry in the early 20th century because there was no free trade. The colonies are everywhere. But this is the 21st century. China has a permanent seat in the United Nations. They're fully integrated into our free world. They're free trader. They're taking the biggest benefits from our free trade system. They have nothing to complain about. It's not necessary to use military forces or gray zone forces. They can simply cooperate with us. That's the future. I'd have to say, but the mounting nationalism inside China is influenced the government. And I have to say the government is riding upon that somehow. I hope that this COVID thing will make them rethink again their strategy. Because we need leadership, co-leadership. We need cooperation here to cope with this world pandemic.
Japan's in an interesting position, one might say difficult position. We've talked about China, obviously Japan's biggest market. And on the other side, there's the US, Japan's most important security ally. And then up north, you've got Russia and what's going on there with Putin and his 2024 issue and his attempt to prolong his time in power. So Japan's sort of surrounded by in an inhospitable neighborhood, particularly with regard to the US and China. Though, how much maneuverability does Japan have between these two far larger powers? What's Japan's degree of strategic maneuverability, do you think, between China and the US in particular?
Yeah, with the vectors in different direction, I have to say. One is the logic of the security, national security is different from the markets. When China rises, that pushes us closer to the United States. It's inevitable. Their military size is far bigger than ours. Military budget is 4 times bigger than ours. The economy is now 3 times bigger than ours. US is still much bigger than China in terms of military budget, 4 times bigger than China. And US economy is 4 times bigger than ours. China is only 3 times bigger than ours. To go to strengthen our strategic ties with the United States is to keep the strategic balance in Asia. Without that, we have surrender to pressure from the continent. So keeping close ties with the US in the logic of national security, this is vital. We'll never concede on that. Market is different. I have to say that the decoupling is one thing, but decoupling is has different meanings. Our security community people, we're afraid of the new technology things. Now the GAFA money is much bigger than our budget for research and development in Japan, maybe twice as big as ours. And the new technology is changing everything, like space, cyber, electronic, magnetic fields. And we have to be careful about that. The free flow of technologies is a bit dangerous. This is one thing. But the decoupling in terms of direct investments is quite another. The companies are flowing out of China because of the rise of wage. And this is market force. This has nothing to do with the security. And I'm sure that for the low-tech things, many companies will stay in China and many companies will go into China. This is not national security issue. National security issue is high-tech issue and not the low-tech issue. We have to make a distinction here when we talk about decoupling with China.
I'm glad you mentioned technology, space, and cyber, because that's a very good segue, I think, to Yuka, because you have some questions on these issues. So I'll hand over the chair to you now, Yuka, please.
Exactly. So thank you very much for the fascinating conversation. So I would like to follow up on a question so the National Security Secretariat had set up a new economic division this April to basically to deal with the pressing economic security challenges like the high-tech competition, strategic infrastructure investments, and emerging digital currency issues. So in your view, what should these new units be focusing on? What are their priorities?
Good. This is just a start for us. We have no econ section in NSC. Long debated since the beginning of the NSC, but it's came to reality. I'm very happy to see that. I have to say that we're just starting everything from zero. First of all, we have to know who has what in Japan. When Americans said 14 areas of new technology are the targets areas for protection, I have to say our engineers did not know that. We didn't know who has what in Japan. So we just started to know a mapping who has what in Japan. I visited many labs, 20, 30. They have everything. But in Japan, the military technology is limited to defense ministry, and the other agencies are not very much concerned about the military aspect of their own technology. They don't know how they could be used in the military field. They don't know it, and it covers very vast part. It's not only screwed, in the 1987 Toshiba export incidents. This is not a part of a piece. This is about a field of research and development. It covers the basic research, applied research and development. And it's not only semiconductors. Semiconductor issues are very easy to understand, but we have to talk about quantum. We have to talk about the DNA editing and these things. It's very new things are coming in, and it's led by not by the military sector. It's covered by the private sectors. That's the reason why we are vigilant now. We have to know, one, who has what in Japan. Two, we have to protect the free flow of these technologies to China or any other nations. It's not about China. China, North Korea, Syria. There are people who can use this for the military purpose. We have to be careful. So we have to protect these things. Protection means two things: from back door and from the front door. From back door, it's very simple: cyber thefts. And these things we have to be vigilant on that. But from front door, they can invest buyouts companies and bring them all to their own homelands. They can do it, or they can simply send massively students. They can learn rightly. They can bring back things, and they can invite the frustrated people to China. Our companies do not have much money these days, but they have a lot of money. They can invite people. This is what our major governments did, and they are doing in a much, much greater scale. We are not against the free exchange of scientists, but we have to protect some core fields where we have to keep supremacy. Otherwise, we're going to lose everything. Quantum, for example, is something that we have to think about seriously. 20 years later, quantum computers coming in, that changes everything. Everything, AI, robotics, not only that, the pharmaceuticals, fintech, that will change everything. Now we have to think about 20 years ahead, and that is the core issue, protection. Third is we have to develop ourselves. Our money is tight. We have 4 trillion yen. The United States government have 20 trillion yen for R&D, and the private sector has much, much bigger money. And we have to develop our technology. And unfortunately, I have to say in Japan, pacifism is very strong. Academia is not very much keen. They're rather against cooperating with Ministry of Defense. Our industrial sector, the heavy industries, military sector is very small. It's very different from the United States. Now, we are not talking about the weapons. We're talking about the future promising sectors. And there, we have to talk about public interests. It's not only about defense, but natural disaster relieving or anti-pandemic measures. And things must be connected with the public interests. And there, defense is a very big one. And fourth, lastly, the Prime Minister Abe changed our arms export policy. Since 1970, it is a total ban, even against the Americans. Even to the Americans, we can't export anything. Now, Prime Minister said, no, we can export things to the friends, allies, but we do not do that not yet very well, because we have no individual strategy to each nation, what country. Without that strategy by the government, industry cannot move. Without exportation, there's no scale merit. It's huge amount of money spent for developing the weapons and assets of the defense things. If you do not export, there's no future for defense industry. And there we have to work upon that. These 4 points are the reasons that the NSC has created the econ section in it.
Thank you very much. So my next question is around more on defense issues. So the big news right now on Japan's defense is Minister Kono's announcement this week to halt the Aegis Ashore procurement. So the decision suggests major changes, potential major changes to Tokyo's thinking behind its missile defense system. So how do you feel about this decision?
Well, this decision was made before the new guideline, defense guideline was made. And this decision was taken in the previous guideline. Thinking was we have to strengthen our missile defense system. But in the new defense guideline, we're now saying that we have to have limited offensive capabilities to defend ourselves. And when the Aegis Ashore was introduced, many applauded this decision, of course. One is we can use Aegis ships for other purposes, for usual naval operation. We can't use them as rocks in the arsenals in the Sea of Japan. When North Korea rattles their sabo, we have to station ships there for several months. It's very expensive, capable ships. Now we were using them as arsenals, like rocks in the Sea of Japan. We can relieve these ships, capable ships, for other operations. This is one thing. Army raised their hands to take over the system ashore, simply because they wanted to be a part of integrated air defense of Japan. We said it's a very good move. The Army should be incorporated into Air Force and Navy to defend ourselves. Integrated air defense is a very good domain for the new cooperation among the three components. So everybody applauded the decision. And I have to say that's but after that, you know, Americans have many missiles and they have missile defense system. They are perfect. We don't have almost no offensive capabilities. And the missile defense, we are spending a lot of money for missile defense only. Is that right thing as a prioritization? We have to ask this question. But I'm a bit surprised that suddenly this was suspended. I'm no longer in the government, I don't know the true reason, but what I hear in the reports is that they were talking about boosters. Boosters of the rockets, anti-missile rockets can fall upon, possibly upon civil sectors, could hurt somebody. And the risk is small, but people said this can be fixed technically, but this can be very costly, could take time. I hear that this is the reason of the Minister Kono's decision. I'm sorry about the sudden change of the course that is causing some confusions, and I have to add, the COVID forced the government to spend a huge amount of money, and money is tight too. So next step, I don't see that in the immediate future.
Thank you very much. So my final question would be, you have space on your background, and the 2018 defense strategy by Japan says that Japan wants to achieve superiority in space, cyber, and electromagnetic field. So, so when the big space powers like the US, Russia, and China are developing anti-satellite weapons, both kinetic and non-kinetic, and there's more potential roles for the private sectors to play in defense and security in space. So what do you think, in your view, Japan should be focusing on? How should Japan approach space in defense?
Space made a dramatic debut in 1990 in a war against Saddam Hussein. Americans used that for tactical purpose. It was for surveillance, for strategic reasons they were there, but they used that for tactical use as a brilliant victory against Saddam Hussein. And the space has 4 missions. One is reconnaissance, of course. Second is communication. The third is positioning. The fourth is the time synchronization. And this is absolutely necessary for modern warfare, contemporary warfare. It's a very important part of this. This is no longer a supporting domain. This is a very crucial domain. And this is connected by cyberspace. And cyber makes things very easy for transmission of the communications and everything. But that means the satellites are very vulnerable too, with cyber attack. Even kinetic attack, you can't see submarines even today. You don't know where they are. Satellites, you can grasp exactly where they are. It's very easy to destroy. And everybody knows this is a crucial part of the modern warfare. The first step of the next warfare is cyber attack in the civilian sector to continue warfare, and the instant attacks against the satellites to black out the space. This is new phase of warfare, and we have to be prepared. And Japan is a latecomer. We say this is new domain. It is not new domain. This is a very important conventional domain today. We're just catching up. Our Air Force, I believe, will become very soon Aerospace Force. And they're under Prime Minister's instruction. They are making big efforts to catch up with the Americans, Russians, and the Chinese. And we have to be resilient in the space too. We have to think about, after blackout of space, what shall we do? How can we protect them against the cyber attack or jamming or even laser attack from the ground? And these are very new things that we have just started to think about.
Thank you very much for these insightful discussions. Now I would like to hand the discussion back to Robert.
Thank you very much, Yuka. So we've got, as I'd expected we have a mounting set of questions. But we have one blue hand, so I'm going to go straight to the blue hand and then go to the written questions, all of which look really, we have a number of blue hands actually. So let's go Richard, could you unmute, please, Nobuyasu Abe for the first question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Yes. Mr. Kanehara advocated engaging China. And that sounds nice and everybody's in favor of engaging. But in the field of arms control, Trump administration is trying hard to engage China after they have withdrawn from the INF treaty and in view of the extension question of New START treaty. Is there any good idea, Mr. Kanehara, we can engage China in that field?
Just Nobuyasu Abe, could you just identify your affiliation, please?
Oh, currently I don't have any position, but I have been Under Secretary General of the United Nations. Most recently, I was a senior fellow at the Belfast Center at Kennedy School, Harvard Kennedy School.
Kanehara-san, would you like to take the question?
Ambassador Abe was a very senior, important diplomat of Japan. I was serving him in the United Nations, I have to say. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your question. I have to say I have no good idea because the rising power will not accept a lead upon their military forces. We have strong sentiments against the Naval Disarmament Conference in Washington, London in 1920s. Simply because Japan was rising in this way. We are very angry against the lead put up by the Britishers and the Americans. Russians accepted talks with Americans for nuclear disarmament simply because they were in decline. Since 1950s, they're long time in decline. They came up in this way and in decline. They negotiated. Nikolai I started the Hague Peace Conference 1899 simply because he had no money. China has big money and still rising. And I don't think they would accept any lead upon them. For them, the United States is a matured big country. Russia has shrunk drastically. Why should China adjust to their size of any arsenal? That's what they're thinking. After China becomes very big and starts to decline, they say we would accept negotiations with you, but not at this time. So that means we'll be drawn into a very lengthy expansionist movements of China and military build-up will continue in Asia. I'm sorry to say this.
Thank you. I'm going to go to another blue hand before I go to the written questions from Ken Endo. Richard, could you unmute Ken Endo, please?
Oh. Do
Ken
you hear
Endo.
me?
Yes, we can hear you.
That's great. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wonder what Mr. Kanehara would advise to the Japanese top leader in case President Trump would be re-elected this autumn. Just as in his first term, trying to accommodate his demands or try to reorient the Japanese strategy for the medium to long-term future. That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Endo. I have to say that apart from the very harsh rhetoric against China and the unilateralism that they assert, I have to say that the President Trump kept alliance in Asia and strengthened ties with Japan, and that secures the stability in the region. And sometimes, you know, the American focus was shifted from Europe to the Middle East. It was in Asia, in Korean War and Vietnam War. And after that, it did not come back to Asia a long time. But I have to say that we need leadership of Americans in the region. And we need Southern strategy that is beyond Taiwan. After withdrawal from Vietnam, US has no strategy in the South. And now China is rising. And China is facing not Japan. Our Okinawan islands are facing Japan. Taiwan is in the middle of it. And then South China Sea China is facing two big seas, East China Sea and the South China Sea and Taiwan. And we have to craft a common strategy. We have to engage these nations in Southeast Asia, and they are waiting for a leadership. Otherwise, China could pick up one by one in the region.
Thank you, Kanehara-san. I'm going to move to a couple of written questions now. We've got some more blue hands. The audience have certainly taken us up on your offer of answering anything here, Kanehara-san. We have a lot of good questions. I've got a question, the first question actually that we had from Yoso Furumoto about the NSC and NSS. The establishment of the National Security Council and the National Security Secretariat is one of the signatory achievements of the Abe administration. After the Abe administration, how confident are you that the next Prime Minister of Japan will use these institutions as core national security and diplomatic mechanisms? The successor may try to change the way things work. I presumably I should have a question mark after it. So questions that presumably are quite dear to your heart, Kanehara-san.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have to say the NSC is a White House. It's West Wing and the Executive Office. So it depends upon the Prime Minister, how he uses this office. It's up to him. But I have to say one more thing, that this NSC is not a sudden achievement. It's the achievements of the efforts of maybe 30 years since Hashimoto, Prime Minister Hashimoto. He said, no, bureaucracy shall not run the country. Political leaders shall drive the country, the policy. He started this. Before that, Nakasone-san thought the same thing. And since Hashimoto-san, the Prime Minister's office worked very hard, and they strengthened one by one their offices. We had only silo, intelligence, crisis managers team stood up. Now they're very powerful. And the Econ office, this is the most powerful one in the Prime Minister's office. They are very powerful today, control budgets. And then finally, security part was added to that organization. And this was an achievement of a long-standing efforts of PM office to establish its authority over the bureaucracy. And this will not change. And the politicians too, statesmen, they changed in 1990s. Before Hashimoto-san, many said the bureaucrats can't run the country. We're very busy with politics. It's changed drastically. New generation was born. That generation was called the new species in Japanese politics. One of them is Prime Minister Abe and Minister Kono, Minister Shiozaki. These young generations start to think that we have to be responsible in policy making, and they are doing that now. And the political leadership will not be lost. Whosoever the Prime Minister, he will continue this trend. If he does not, he will be ousted by people, because people no longer trust bureaucracy. They want to control the government through their choices of the government. And this will not change. This basic trend will not change.
Thank you, Kanehara-san. Question, a blue hand, top of the blue hand list on my screen. Gordon Wilson, please. Richard, would you unmute, please, Gordon Wilson?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, Gordon Wilson. I'm a fellow at RUSI and a member of IISS. Can I change the subject to sport, which is big at the moment? The shift of the Olympic Games a year, was that a big economic hit on Japan? And given that go back to years' time, provided not a further outbreak of SARS, coronavirus, is it really is it reassured? Is it very certain to go on, or is there a debate perhaps that the slightest drop of a concern it might be abandoned? And just a follow-up of that from the Rugby World Cup, which I was there, naturally was a fantastic experience. Were there significant economic and political advantages that have come to surface as a consequence of looking at the success of that tournament?
You ask me the importance of the Olympic Games?
Yes.
Is that the question? Well, I have to say that this COVID shock is much, much bigger It's a comet crash. So it's not about Olympic game itself. It's already, the damage is huge. But we want to continue the games next year. Athletes are waiting for that opportunity. We want to make this a real game next year. It depends upon the second, third waves of the COVID and vaccination. But we want to do that. This is important to lift the spirits of the people. But economically, of course, it is important. I have to say, government is now using trillion yen to pick up the economy from save from the collapse. And the Olympic Games would help, of course, but this is a part of it. And we want to success of the Olympic Games, but it is not the size of pandemic's damage.
Thank you, Kanehara.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon Wilson. I've got two questions, one on Taiwan and one on North Korea. So sort of group these together, even though they're obviously enormous subjects. The one on North Korea is from Bill Emmett of the IISS, of course. And Bill says, recently North Korea has reverted to making provocative acts, so far mainly directed at the ROK, e.g. blowing up the liaison office, cutting hotlines, etc. What do you think this signifies? What do you expect from North Korea given the US election in November, and how can Japan prepare for it? And if you can keep that in your head, Kanehara-san, I've got a question on Taiwan, cross-strait relations from Alessio Patalano at King's College. Given what's happening in Hong Kong with the erosion of the one country, two systems, the dropping of the official dropping of the peaceful wording in the official position on reunification, and considering the PRC's 2049 timetable, how does Kanehara-san see the evolution of cross-state relations and the impact on Japanese security? So two quite big questions, North Korea and Taiwan, please.
North Korea, they blew up the symbol building of cooperation between South and North. And there are reported reasons for that. But statement of Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un, she showed very much angry, said that South Korea does not deliver the commitments they made to the North, economic cooperation. I think it's true, simply because North must be in trouble because of COVID. Border is closed with China. That is the only outlet. They are breeding the money, technology, everything from there. The other parts are shut by sanctions. And with the border shut with China because of pandemic, there must be some trouble in the border area. Must be poverty aggravated by COVID, and they must have been trouble. They needed help, and South Korea did not deliver that. That's the reason why they are very angry. And some say that the propaganda papers that humiliates Kim family, that angers Kim Jong-un, and that's understandable because for them, the leader, the authority is very important. There's no other legitimacy in the government, so they must be very angry. They show that. And thirdly, they're frustrated with no progress with the negotiation with Mr. Trump. Americans are now too busy with the elections. They can't expect any good progress in the negotiations. They have to appeal themselves. I have to say that the North Korea wants the cooperation with us, with the South, with the Americans, with the Japanese. Our policy is very clear since the 1990s to help North Koreans to change, like Eastern Europeans. If they abandon the nukes, if they return our abductees, we can help them. That's our policy, long-standing policy. But I have to say, China is different. We have to know that why China did not follow Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan. They came to the Korean Peninsula to fight against Americans, simply because it's very close to Beijing. We fear Russians coming through there. China fears Americans coming through there. And they will not abandon northern part of Korean Peninsula. They were there for more than 1,000 years. Japan took it out from China. They took it back only half. They stay there. And North Korea is firmly on the orbit of China. That's the reason why North wants to talk to us, talk to Russians, talk to Americans. And there are some limits there. They want to survive as a regime. And COVID put great pressure upon that regime. And the regime is angry against the stop of assistance from South Korea. I think that's the reason of North Korea's blowing up the building in the Kaesong complex, industrial complex. Is that okay, Bill? I'm okay. Did you satisfy? Are you satisfied?
I think
Can
he is. I think he
I
is.
change Taiwan? Yeah, good.
Yeah, Taiwan, please.
Yeah, the Professor Patanano, thank you for the question on Taiwan. This is a very difficult issue. Hong Kong, I have to say that Xi Jinping is in trouble because I don't think he just expected this. The confrontation with the US, sudden confrontation with the US in trade issues. We know that, but they don't know it. They are a bit shocked to see the change of seas in the American politics and economy business circle. And no longer, China is not a geese that produce every day mountains of golden eggs. Americans could not make money as much as they wanted. And they see the same things produced in the States are produced in China. They fed it into the world markets. This is what we see. The Americans are seeing the same thing. They have to be a bit angry. But that puts Xi Jinping in a very difficult position. Hong Kong pushes them in a very difficult position. He was smashing his enemies and curbing out corruption from the party one by one. He invited many enemies. And difficult situation surrounding China makes him shaky, and he has to be strong to stay in power. And Hong Kong is an irritation. This is not Hong Kong democracy thing. This is his power basis issue. And he cannot make any concessions there. And I think that he is determined to not to go to suicide with Hong Kong democracy. And our companies, many of them are there. American companies, British companies are there. They will not change these things drastically, suddenly. Slowly, they want to do that. This is Byzantium tactics. They want to do this very slowly, but they will do it. They're determined to do so. They know militarily we can't do anything for Hong Kong. And we have to think of a possibility that the security apparatus is coming into Hong Kong. That changes many things. One nation, two systems. It's very difficult to maintain. When we withdraw special status from Hong Kong, what would happen? Who would be the gateway for China, the investments, Shanghai? China will not lose anything. Outside of Hong Kong, the Zhugang area became very much developed. It's not only Hong Kong now. So Hong Kong was victimized for the power basis of Xi Jinping. And this will start, and gradually this will make progress. This is Hong Kong. We have to help them, but there's no military way. United sending messages, don't do it. That's all we can do for the moment. Taiwan is very different. They have 23 millions. It's an island as big as Kyushu Islands. And there are high mountains in the eastern part, higher than Fuji Mountains. Almost 4,000 meters. It's not easy to take these islands. They have 200,000 soldiers, well trained. But now we are confident that they don't do that. 10 years later, 20 years later, when the economic size reaches American size, possibly, and when their military budgets become, say, 50%, 60% of American size, the crucial thing is timing. Our weakness, this hub and spoke system in the Pacific American Alliance system, the weakness is distance simply. The Pacific is much, much wider than the Atlantic, 10,000 kilometers. They have to come over, and it takes time. That's the reason why China is investing a lot to A280 strategy. If they can delay American arrival, if they can finish a war in a week, they might be tempted. Not today, but 10 years later, 20 years later, before they peak out. I can't deny the possibilities. So we have to be vigilant. We are not encouraging the independence of Taiwan. We want simply to continue this peaceful status quo in Asia. Don't disturb it. This is liberal world. Everybody is happy. China is making huge amount of money. They are respected. They have permanent seat in the United Nations. There's no reason to change the status quo by force. And that's a message from us, and we hope that China would understand.
Thank you, Kanehara-san. I'm going to extend this webinar by 15 minutes. We have so many questions just teeming in, so I want to give a little bit of chance for a few more questions. So just to warn everybody that we will be a bit longer. I'm going to go to a blue hand now, to Joseph Ross. Richard, would you unmute Joseph Ross, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, Joseph Ross, Global Taiwan Institute from United States. Yeah, so my question is, once again, another question about Taiwan. So where do you see Taiwan fitting into the longer term strategy of Japan? You talked about it a little, but do you see any opportunities for defense cooperation going forward? Thank you.
I have to say that we can't defend Taiwan ourselves because we're weaker than China militarily alone. And it is only when US is committed, we have to think about it, what we can do. If you expect us to do the protection job of Taiwan alone without Americans' help, you are dreaming. We don't want to do that. We simply cannot do it. And the US forces are well ready in Japan, in Korea. We have planned, we are co-exercising every year. We're ready. And we are successful in deterring Russians in Cold War time, pushing back North Koreans. We kept peace in Asia for more than half a century, 70 years with this system. American military readiness are very much up in the north, in Japan and in Korea. Down from Taiwan to Southeast Asia after Vietnam, I have to say it's very weak flank. And without cooperation between Japan and the United States, and possibly I have to say, I hope very much with Korea, maybe it's impossible, but with Korea and Taiwan, Australia, we have to think about it now. And maybe 10 years later, it's too late. Okay?
Thank
Joe?
you, Kanehara-san.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph Ross. A question from Jim Schoff at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Quite a long question. I'll read it out. The combination of China's recent aggressiveness, North Korean continued nuclear and missile development, Trump's pressure on South Korea and Japan for huge host nation support increases, and a regional global health pandemic argues for closer Japan-South Korea cooperation as a strategic imperative for both countries. The challenges are well known and stubborn, but is there any avenue or method of bilateral cooperation that you can see as a potential way to enhance Japan-ROK ties, even as historical arguments persist on a different track? Or is there no real hope for bilateral improvement in the foreseeable future?
Too much to say. Well, we love Koreans. And I served in Korean embassy as DCM, and I experienced no unpleasant things while I was in Korea. There are extremists, of course, anti-Japanese, slogan shouting people. But I have to say one thing, that we were like that in 1960s, 1970s. They are framed in the domestic Cold War framework. We just lost it when the Soviets collapsed. And now there's no youngsters remember Cold War. I'm teaching kids in the universities. They don't understand the word Cold War. They don't understand the word the right-wingers, left-wingers. They don't understand communism. It is us. But Korea is very different. In 1987, they got democratized. And they had Gwangju incidents in 1980. All the leftists were in jails. They came up. And the students were politicized in 1980s. These students are just in the midst of Moon Jae-in government. They're very ideological. And because of North Korea, this domestic Cold War framework does not disappear. They're just there. They're just like in 1960s Japanese socialists. A very ideological coexistence with the North, rapprochement with the North is the value. Anti-capitalism, anti-Americanism, anti-Japanese are their domestic context, and they are fixed there. They can't think beyond the peninsula. But I have to say, we are like that in 1960s. Americans waited for us to become mature 20 years. Now it's our turn. We have to wait. Young Koreans are very different. Koreans are no longer ideological. They are full of confidence. The Samsung beaten Sony, and Hyundai is now catching up with this Toyota. Their economic size is now as big as Russia, 600,000 soldiers, very modern, equipped, and supported by the American forces. They are the great military power in Asia. They are the greatest arms exporter in Asia. And the South Korea is now a great country, but today's generation ruling ones do not feel it. But young ones, they are confident. I think we believe that they can be strategic. But it takes time. It's generational change. It cannot be changed over time. And as far as North Korea is there, they cannot get rid of this domestic ideological division thinking. And unfortunately, when the leftists is in power, we have a very difficult situation with them. And this is ideological, and this is generational. It takes time.
Kanehara-san.
Can I add one more thing? Yeah, sorry, can I add one more thing, Jim? The Korea is from the beginning of our history, it is very important. The first war we fought in the peninsula was to help Pekche, destroyed by Shira. This is the collective self-defense. We are twins, and we know when the peninsula is empty, weak, the continental powers can attack us. Mongols attacked us twice. And we know that peninsula must be 1, independent, 2, prosperous, 3, strong enough to be stable. That's our strategic objective. And North Korean methods can reach everywhere, can reach everybody, Guam, Hawaii, and Tokyo. This is one theater. We have to think in this way, one theater. There's no rear and front. We have to think of the new situation together. And it is very difficult with this Moon Jae-in government, but we have to push this, maybe together with the Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanehara-san. I'm going to go to another blue hand now. Nicholas McLean, please.
Thank you very much, Kanehara Sensei. I would like to ask you about the debate which we are having in Britain, in the British Parliament, on attitudes to Huawei from China. Huawei's position in 5G is especially strong. Europe and America are talking about building up strength for cooperation in 6G and 7G, but meanwhile we have the question of how far to work with Huawei on 5G and whether that will endanger our position in the Five Eyes. It'd be interesting to have a Japanese perspective on that issue.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Can I start? 5G is telephone. 5G is the cell phone.
Yes.
And it uses local stations for processing information. That makes the job of the big server lighter. That enhances the speed of communication. This is 5G. That means local stations must introduce some software, lots of them, applications. It can be pure white when you introduce that from anybody, but it must be updated. The cyberspace is very weak for updating because they invite everybody from outside. And Japan, Australia, United States we opted for zero risk. It's not only China, we don't name nations, but we have to avoid any complications in 5G system. That's our policy. To tell you the truth, we see possibilities of conflicts in Asia. We can't accept any risk in 5Gs. So involved nations, we have to be vigilant against them. Europe is different. You don't see China. You see Russians only. You don't see North Korea. And maybe the attitudes of European nations are a bit different from ours. You don't opt for a zero risk option. I have to say Huawei is good. And they are high silicon people. They're very good, catching up with us very quickly. But this is where the Americans are. And everybody in Asia are fearful because they can truly catch up with Qualcomm, Tokyo Electron, British Arms. They are not yet there, but they can come up with that. They would dominate the 5G world. And I have to say, outside Western world, developed nations, many nations are introducing 5G. We are decoupling, but the decoupled part is much bigger than ours. This is the reality. And we have to think of the risk involved seriously. Once introduced, it's very difficult to eradicate. Is that okay, Nick? Hello, Nick.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kanehara-san. A written question now from Céline Pajon at IFRI in Paris. To Kanehara-san, thank you very much for your presentation. There has been a lot of talk in Europe regarding the concept of strategic autonomy for the EU, with various understandings and interpretations. How would you define the conditions of strategic autonomy for Japan?
Oh, that's a very French question. I have to say it's multipolar world, isn't it? France is lucky because you have Germany before Russia. There are many nations. You have the British nuclear power next to you. You have big ones like Poles, Italians, and Spanish, and you have Americans committed on land just east of Paris. It's the situation of the French government, and I understand that goal is. I was raised in France because I studied there. I love France very much, but our geopolitical situation is not as lucky as yours. We are alone. American systems have no spokes. They have the bilateral arrangements only. We have no NATO here. And the Koreans, Japanese, Australians, okay, militarily okay. But after that, only Philippines and Thailand as American allies. And this is not enough. This is a fragile system. Hub spokes, we need steel spokes and talking to each other. We are divided. This is not NATO. And we want to be a sector and a pole in the multipolar world like France. But unfortunately, our situation forces us to get closer to the United States. Otherwise, we cannot keep stability here in the region. We cannot protect this newly emerging liberal order in Asia. Ça va?
Just as a coda to that question, if we may, Kanehara-san, from John Chipman, who runs the IISS. John is asking if people in Tokyo worry more about the prospect of the US perhaps not guaranteeing Japanese security. Would there be a debate perhaps in Japan on how Japan achieves some form of strategic autonomy?
Putting aside the host nation supports money negotiation, this is very hard. Putting aside that, our thinking is a bit different from yours. Russia is a still formidable military force, but the economic size is just like Korea, South Korea. And they took Crimea. It was a very big shock for everybody. And they are doing cyber things. But we cannot imagine that they would attack NATO nations. And Berlin, they're beefing up the military forces again, and the Americans are withdrawing. But German beefing up is canceling the impacts of American withdrawing. Balance is there. And Middle East, Islamic State was destroyed. Terrorists scattered. Syria is in trouble. Libya is in trouble. But America is no longer buying oil from there. And the focus is now out of this sandbox. We believe that American focus is coming back to Asia. They left us after the Vietnam War. And Asia was not a difficult part for the Americans. China was our partner. Russian Siberia was empty. They had big military forces, but the first front is the south, the Black Sea, and then the NATO front. Our front was the third front for Russians. But now with China rising, no Asian country can cope with China alone. And if the Americans want to be a part of this prosperous China, they have to be serious, and we believe that they're coming back to Asia. This is pivot, and it's not on paper, it's real. And Obama said it simply, but with Bush already, the major assets were shifting from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Obama said it as pivot, and President Trump said, in the Pacific is one theater. And we believe that Americans are coming back to Asia.
Thank you. I'm going to go to our, got about 3 more questions to go because we want to finish at 1:15 because Kanehara-san's been working very hard on all these questions. So for the blue hand, please. Michael McDevitt, please.
Kanehara-san, it's a good day again, and I appreciate your comments, as always. I was taken with your comment regarding we can no longer ask the United States to take the whole burden in Japan and the Republic of Korea, ASEAN, and so forth. But to me, the key point that you made was they have to have, or you in the region have to have strategic commitment. And so I'd like to ask you to expand a little bit on your idea of how we develop strategic commitment amongst the medium-sized powers in Asia.
Just quickly, Michael McDevitt, would you describe your
yeah. Yes, I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Naval Analysis, largely retired now.
Yes, Mike was my mentor. So if I make mistakes, it's his mistake. I have to say the American military power was focused upon Japan and South Korea because we're facing Russians and North Koreans. China was a partner with us. We never thought of southern part. Suddenly Taiwan is a focus, and then we have to engage Southeast Asians. One, we need American commitment here because there's no true southern strategy. Kurt Campbell worked hard for that, but since after that, we don't see many efforts in Southeast Asia. And when president does not come to their summits, they feel humiliated. We are not important. That's their feeling. We are abandoned, not important. And China is like Byzantium. There's no true border like Byzantium. When they are strong, they simply expand. And you're all my vassals. That's their attitudes. The order is vertical, not flat. And they don't want to be dominated, but without American commitment, they can never counterbalance China. So first of all, we have to have a strategy. We have to have a commitment. Many karaokes, many golfs, but that's a cost you have to pay with them. We have to engage them. We have to have a clear commitment and of our efforts. I have to say it's not easy. The South China Sea is difficult for everybody, even for China, for Japan, for the United States. During the Pacific War, we owned the Spratly. It was Japanese islands called Shinnan, governed through Taiwan. Taiwan has some part of it still, important ones. Are we ready to do what? We have to know what to do and how to do. And I have to say, as I said, we had plans in Japan, in Korea only, and then south to Taiwan, we have nothing. And we have to think of it, otherwise they don't trust us. We have to say 3 things. One is the democracies, or at least liberal order in Asia is emerging. We're happy to live with it. We will protect it, enhance it. Second, the globalization will engulf them. China +1 strategy is the strategy of many companies. Now the wealth is flowing out of China to ASEAN nations again. In 1990, they fled to China. Now they're coming back. Now they're flowing into West Asia, like Bangladesh and India. And this is one big free market going on. We have to protect them. That's the reason why we push so hard at TPP. We are very happy if you're back. And thirdly, we have to keep strategic balance. And we need some strategy for preventing China from picking up freely these islands in South China Sea. Even for China, it is not easy to keep logistic lines to protect these islands. And we have to simply show the principles. There's no change of status quo by force, even by coast guards of militia. And we have to show that presence operation, freedom passage operations are not strong enough. But I don't know what to do together. And we can't do it alone. As for just like Taiwan contingents, we can't do anything alone. But if you are committed, we're happy to be consulted. I mean, strategy. We should be careful because our basic stance is to engage China, even today. It's not wise to provoke the jingoistic hardliners in the PLA. They would mobilize their huge power to fight against us. It's not what we want. But we have to be ready, and we have to try to persuade them with a position of strength, not a position of weakness. Maybe bad answer for my mentor.
I was just hoping to have some thoughts on strategic commitment from the other countries as well.
Yes, sir. They still feel very small. Even Korea feel very small. They don't feel up to the responsibilities, the true ones, the due ones to them. They're now running it, not yet there. And for the other nations in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, big ones, but they are still not yet ready to be a strategic partner with us. And we have to engage them. They still fear that we might abandon them one day. They are asking questions. Are we important for the Japanese and Americans? Would they seriously engage us? Would they keep commitment? Would they not abandon us? That's the question they're asking themselves. We have to face them squarely, sir. Otherwise, they're still doubtful.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kanehara-san. I'm going to take 3 more questions. We've notionally got 5 minutes left, so to just squeeze 3 final questions in, but they're such good questions. I want to ask them. So 2 written questions and 1 blue hand. Written question from Sanjay Baru, used to be at the IISS, used to be with the Indian government from Delhi. China has recently had a military clash with India. How do you view Chinese behavior? And perhaps this is the bit that you can answer, Kanehara-san, for us. How can Japan and India work together in creating a new Asian security architecture?
Well, this skirmish in the Himalayan mountains that I believe that PLA killed 20 soldiers of India, and in a very primitive way. Chinese biggest enemy is Russia. Russia carved out a huge part of Siberia. They don't want to clash against the Russians. They want skirmishes. And they do that in Kashmir, in Bhutan, in Senkaku, in South China Sea. We don't know why they are doing these small things using the PLA or small troop of soldiers. I think the military jingoistic part, they're playing part, and the party is now allowing them to do that somehow, simply because, not positively, but simply because they can't control, they have to control the military. And the atmosphere in the military is the fighting wolf like movie. They are dazzled by the economic success. Now they feel much greater than before. They're taking back their positions. And like European power, the imperial powers did to China, we have to do the same thing. And that's a very big mistake, but the mood is there. And the mood cannot be contained fully. I think that's what's going on here. And India, I have to say, India is now rising. And this is the last chapter of global scaled industrialization. India is the possible future superpower. This is the only superpower that can appear in the future after China. And this is a born democracy with Ganji Nehru. And we bet on that. We believe that India will be our greatest partner in the midst of this century. You have mountains with China, the big Himalayan mountains. We don't believe that you clash against China with big land warfare, but your naval forces are very effective. You're very effective in the Indian Ocean. We can't go there. Americans are covering the Indian Ocean too. But with the maritime cooperation with India, it's very important. And your simply size is enough to counterweight Chinese rise. And we bet on your democracy. So India is a very important partner for us.
Thank you, Kanehara-san. And we'll go to the last blue hand here, Hiroaki Nakanishi, please. Richard, would you unmute Nakanishi-san, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, maybe I might miss to put the bottom lower hand.
Oh, okay. So,
yeah.
inadvertently you have. That's okay.
Sorry about that.
No
Yeah.
problem at all. So in which case, let's move to our last question from Mark Fitzpatrick from IISS. Very good to hear this insightful webinar featuring my old friend Kanehara-san. Do you envisage further changes to the limits Japan has placed on its defense capabilities and cooperation with the US? For example, will Japan accept the deployment of nuclear-capable intermediate-range missiles? Will it adjust the 3 nuclear no principles to formally accept entry of US ships carrying nuclear weapons?
What I have to say that the American allies are all islanders, Japanese, Taiwanese, and Filipinos, and the Australia, and only continental ones are Korea, and Thailand is not under very strong pressure militarily. And American nuclear deterrence in the region was not land-based one. They had some in Korea, they had some in Okinawa. They withdrew it simply because they believe that their conventional forces are strong enough to deter and the possible enemies, and their strategic nuclear weapons are enough to destroy or deter the nuclear enemies in Asia. And so it's based upon the air-based and sea-based nuclear tactical weapons and strategic weapons that kept nuclear deterrence in Asia. And with the INF abolishments, and this is simply because the Americans say Russians are cheating Americans, but deployments and developments are very, very close. Sometimes difficult to say the developing weapons are deployed. But the secret, hidden reason is China is not in the agreements. INF is absolutely European agreement. And China was not a player at that time. China is now accumulating huge number of short and medium range of missiles, ranged missiles. And some are, of course, nuclear. They're facing against Japan-US alliance and India. And this must be a part of it. And then I have to say that the not nuclear missiles, but the short and the medium-ranged missiles, Taiwanese and Koreans have a lot of them. It's only Japan who don't have that. And under new defense guideline have started to acquire a bit longer missiles than short-range missiles. And this is just a start. And we have to think of the balance of the forces. It's conventional and nuclear. Is the latter is robust enough to deter, or is there any vacuum here to fill in? And who should fill in with conventional forces or nuclear forces? Who should do that? And what should be done? And this big picture is necessary. And I think it's wrong to pick up a nuclear ground-based missiles. We have to put that in Asia. This is too narrow a question. We have to think of a big picture. Is the American extended nuclear deterrence with the conventional forces, with these divided allies, is enough to deter any big conflicts in the region?
Thank you, Kanehara-san.
Not answering your question, but
thank you for that. And with that, I think I'm going to close the session today. Absolutely sensational session. I know that Yuka has been sort of dying to hear you speak, as have I. And you've just, Kanehara-san, you've answered on so many different topics. It's been absolutely wonderful. So a huge thank you from us. And I'm sure the audience is giving you a virtual round of applause right across the globe for your incredible tour of global geopolitics, economics, and of course, insights into Japan's strategic thinking. I was particularly interested by your thoughts on Japan's role in building a liberal democracy bloc in Asia, and how you want to how you see Japan enhancing and supporting that. But so much of interest in what you said. So an absolutely enormous thank you from us at the IISS. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Yuka-san. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Kanehara-san. Apologies to all those. We had so many questions that I couldn't get to everybody, so big apologies there. But thank everybody as well for joining. Some of you getting up early, some of you missing your lunch, and some of you going to bed a bit later than perhaps otherwise. So thank you, everybody. And with that, I will close the session. Thank you.